差啲嘢先，所以我就開咗對住佢。細㗎嘛。in-house 嘅 Surveyors 即係成間好似拎合埋嗰個叫市場需要。搞緊另外一個就係做Yeap就 homestead 我哋叫啲人以前而家全嘅搞緊Yeap會唔係出邊買？出邊其實佢係德國嗰個 SAP SAP 係啦 SAP 以前你哋嗰個公司就喺Steve啊，係啊，到咗未啦？我左問佢，即係我哋有時做啲 research 先知道上。嗰時你哋都講得好 powerful 可以上邊一撳晒出嚟睇其實我即係 paper 就用得最少，我哋即係 paper 就用得最多，咁佢就仲有其他嘅咩西北啊、食啊，因為你始終有啲西北入嘢咧，佢哋知多數都係敏感嘅嘢，即係我哋 paper 一定要我哋一定我接受以前一定好長，即係拎up咗 paper。係，所以 paper 不斷喺度。好似 verbal instruction。因為你哋都唔係住地盤咧，所以 verbal instruction 我都係慢慢。我花間幾厘米，即係會因為 verbal instruction 係啦，要攞翻啲料，係啊，要攞翻啲即係第一步你要去確認。
新聞だから今。
PAQS通常國內有個確得咗之後，PAQS作為但係一定係要個 CM 分
政務會。
PAQS 都唔係咁似
上心。
Hello and welcome. My name is Anthony Mills. I'm from Australia and I'm the moderator for this next session. Now, just for my information, I'm trying to find two other speakers. Our first speaker is here, and I'll make that introduction in a minute. But I'm trying to find Zong Xu. No? Ah, right. He's here. Fantastic. And also, I'm trying to find the third speaker, which is Shinichi Hashimoto. No? Okay.
Shinichi Hashimoto-san.
I'll have to try and track down our third speaker. Okay. All right, well, we have about an hour in this session. We have three speakers, so roughly 20 minutes each. I'm trying to get people to make their presentation in about 15 minutes and then leave around about 5 minutes for questions. That will also give time for the next speaker to get organised. So I'd like firstly to introduce our first speaker, who is from Malaysia. Our first speaker is Surveyor Yeap Kiat, and welcome to the stage. It'll be an interesting paper. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I think most of you guys will be a bit drowsy because due to the lunch. Okay, I'm from the Royal Institution of Surveyors Malaysia, the QS Junior Organisation, QSJO Chair, as well as the PAQS Young QS Group, YQSG, the incoming Chair of. Okay, I'd like to present to you guys the effectiveness of cost analysis and cost planning in Malaysia. Okay, these are the contents which I'll be going through. Okay, the cost planning actually originated officially from the United Kingdom in the year 1951 to 1954, after the Second World War, whereby the government faced a budget deficit and they needed to reduce the cost of the school buildings program. And in that year, the A and B branch was instituted, and they did a cost study of the student places, and they were doing various type of cost study based on like cost per student place and some other ad hoc methods of cost analysis. However, the method used during that time wasn't that effective, and subsequently after 5 years or so, the Ministry of Education and the Hertfordshire County Council they issue something like a bulletin entitled Building Bulletin Number 4 Cost Study, and it was developed by the A and B branch Chief Quantity Surveyor, Mr. James Nisbet, and it was at that time that building elements such as foundation, steel, cladding, roof, etc., they were estimated separately as what we do now, which call it elemental cost analysis, or we call it cost planning. Okay, this is the picture of James Nisbet. He passed away, I think, a couple of years ago, and he's the founder of the James Nisbet and Partners in 1964, and his firm was bought over by Cereal and Sweet in 2008. Okay, he's a member of the Building Hall of Fame of UK, Okay, this guy he's known as the father of cost planning in UK as well as internationally, and his most biggest contribution was at that time in 1950s. He managed to cut the cost of school buildings by 50%. Okay, in the year of 1951, he published an article which is anonymous at the time, and then he introduced cost planning, which at that time it wasn't practiced before, because his method of cost analysis requires the QS to do cost estimate before even the architects came out with the detailed drawings, or even the engineers came out with the structural key plans or anything, whereby the QS already started work, and then they can come up like cost, how much the budget and cost per meter square or cost per whatever they wanted to analyze the building. But and then, however, his method wasn't fully accepted by his peers at the time, whereby some of his peers, the QS practitioners of his time, actually got very outraged and saying that they had to give them more work, and then their fee didn't also increase. So, however, according to him, that despite the criticism, his method of doing cost planning was gradually accepted and is now a standard practice in many countries, including in my country of Malaysia. Okay. This is some of the benefits of cost planning, whereby it enables the designers as well as the QS to visualize the cost proportionment or the cost distribution among the different building elements, and it helps also the client to make these decisions in terms of how to prioritize or how to allocate their building budget. Okay, as a result of Mr. James Nisbet's contribution towards the cost planning methodology in the early 1950s, these are some of the results of his cost planning, results, his effort. And all these schools, which was quite nice at the time, as you can see, all black and white photos, were actually built around this period of 1950s to 1970s. And this is the first one is Archon, the second one is Catford Secondary School, Eltham and Wokingham Secondary School. And this page shows the Kidbrook School. The first one shows the outside, and the rest are the interior of the schools, which is pretty good in today's standard. And this one is the Stevenage Secondary School. Okay. It shows the interior as well as the exterior. And all these schools were built within half the budget of a pre-war school building, thanks to the cost planning method in the UK. And this is the Kingswood and Tulse Hill School in Lambeth. Okay, this is our project or construction, we call it the scope. And it comprises of scope, expectation, and the budget. And during the design stage, it's an ongoing process. And the cost planning actually helps focus on all these three areas, and especially on the bottom right one, the budget, which is the specialty of cost planning. And the cost planning is involved in the beginning stage of the project life cycle. Okay, I'd just like to share with you guys that cost planning is most useful at the beginning or the planning and design stage of the project, whereby the influence is the greatest. The influence here, the red curve, shows the influence of cost planning, and this is the cost incurred, which is the construction phase. It goes up as the project progresses, and cost planning actually can reduce cost the most at the early phase of the project. This is just introduction of cost planning. Okay, coming back to my country, despite all the results and what can be achieved using cost planning internationally, however, we are facing a serious problem in Malaysia because a lot of our quantity surveying practices, we don't actually do cost planning per se, although we able to distribute the cost into various elements, but our method is more like we measure, we come out with approximate quantities, and it's very, very taxing and very problematic, especially when there's numerous changes from the client and from the designers. So then we started to think back, what's preventing us from using this great cost planning method? And then we start to believe that there's this problem of the serious lack of project cost data in our country, and then this research went forth to explore what caused this lack of cost data in our country, and which hampers the usage of cost planning method in our country. And as you can see from here, it says that because due to the small sample of cost data, you virtually cannot do any cost analysis, or you cannot do any call it multiple regression analysis, or you cannot even update the tender price accurately because you don't have anything to benchmark against your this current building project. And this project also went and studied a bit on the culture, attitudes, and belief of the Malaysian construction players, especially the QS consultants. What is it causing us to have this problem in our country? Okay, from this picture you can see the cost planning is the green circle on the left hand side, cost analysis, or you call it cost planning. And this process generates a cost model. In order to have a proper cost model, we need historical benchmark, which is called historical cost data. And from there, you can do various types of cost cutting, which is called like value engineering, value management, and you can come up with alternative proposals. And all these costs, the successful or the final cost model will go back to the cost planning as a historical cost data. It's actually a loop. Okay, from our research, we believe that there's not much motivation by the QS consultant to submit their cost data in the short run because of the fierce competition and the serious fragmentation in our QS consultant segment. And also there's this so-called mentality that sharing might degrade their competitive advantage, or they might have some problem with the clients later on. Okay, in our country, in Malaysia, we have two building cost information services. One is called the BCIC, above, and the second one is called BECA, which is called Building Elemental Cost Analysis, under the CIDB. We found out that there's really little communication between these two bodies with the practicing communities, and virtually very little QS knows about what they're doing and what they're offering in these two cost services body. And the BCIC is actually a subcommittee of the RSM, which is, they play a part in doing the practical assessment for the JTPC, the Joint Test of Professional Competence. Okay, this is the functionality and requirements of cost planning. It requires a cost database. Here it was the historical data, and the rest is the presentation of the cost planning. Okay, our Malaysian QS practice, we are very, very fragmented, and therefore there was a study conducted in 2003, and we found out that less than 20% of the QS practices in Malaysia uses cost planning at the time. And if you go by size of the firms, 20% of the large firm uses cost planning. If you go to the smaller firms, which is less than 5%, it drops down to 19%. And according to the study, 40.4% of the firms have some form of cost planning software. And if you go by the size, it varies from 85% down to 29%. So it's very daunting to see the 29% in the smaller firms, which means they're using Excel. Okay, this is the research methodology. It's by survey, and there's the respondents is 87%, and it's sent to both consultants as well as developers. Okay, the result finding is as follows. First, the conclusion is that there's relatively low undertaking of cost planning in projects in our country. That's the main thing. And the relatively low usage of cost planning is relatively low against the other methods, like approximate quantity, because our country uses approximate quants more than cost planning. And however, we found out that there's a desire among the QS community in our country to switch to cost planning if the conditions were right and they have enough cost data. And from here you can see that actually quite a few of our QS consultants are aware that BCIC is the service provider of cost information. And we also found out that the cost planning are also seldom used in our country, and the usage of cost planning actually depends on the frequency of, the more they use cost planning, therefore they will tend to stick to cost planning. If they're not used to cost planning, I think most QS consultants, they are like not familiar or not ready to use cost planning methods. Okay, this is the second section. It studies the user preference, the values and belief of the QS practices. And we found that majority of Malaysian consultant QS believes that they will benefit a lot from the BCIS system, and the current cost estimation system and techniques used in Malaysia can be improved through the use of cost planning. There's still a lot of area to improve. And the section 3 of the study believes that majority of consultants, they will incline to use cost planning if they are persuaded and there's some sort of like education or best practice showcase to show them, there's availability of cost data and methodology. And we found out that most consultants are quite okay to submit their previous project cost data, which is more than 2 years old, but most of the consultants are reluctant to submit their current cost data, which is less than 2 years old. And this has a serious impact because the data is not up to date and there's a period lag of about 2 years and the price needs to be updated. And we believe that some form of intervention or facilitation by some higher authority is required to reduce the adaptation of cost planning among the QS practice, because if without that, no one seems to be able to adopt this method. Okay, this one is the part 3 is that they believe cost planning sharing will not reduce any competitiveness, and they are okay with a yearly subscription, and the price guide is they are willing to pay around 1,000 ringgit for building cost information services, and they believe that the hindrance of using cost planning is due to some legal and ethical problems in doing the cost planning methods. And they're okay with the privatization of the BCIC, and they have no objection of selling BCIC selling the cost data to other professions. However, they believe there's some flaws in the techniques or methods of cost analysis and planning. And the tackling of problem of lack of cost data is the highest priority as required by the consultants, because they want to use the method and they want somebody to handle the situation for them. And to conclude, okay, as you can see that this is the cost planning process, and the quantity surveyors are the ones churning out the cost plans, and they are the one using the cost data. And this is the cost data produced from the QS. After the project has been awarded, it becomes a historical cost data. And this is the BCIS, which is the repository of cost information. However, at the moment is that there's this group is not functioning, this cycle is not going on. Therefore, we need some third party to come in, and then on top here, you must tell the consultants that we need to use cost data, and you have to submit cost data to BCIS. So this is for the betterment of the QS profession. And with this, I'd like to leave the final toss to you guys, and thank you.
Okay, any questions? Questions for our speaker?
May I ask if your survey samples cover the whole of Malaysia or Western Malaysia, because Malaysia includes East Malaysia as well?
The survey we actually cover the whole Malaysia, but however, the majority of QS practices in our country is more concentrated in West Malaysia. There's fewer consultancy in East Malaysia, Sabah.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, I'd like to introduce our next speaker, who is from China, and please welcome Zhong Ju.